So, welcome to TheDustyFeet.com, because this is a place where we can safely explore the endless ways of God and the interconnection of His creation, where belief understandings, they may be challenged, divine misunderstandings, they may exist in traditional teachings, they just might falter as we pursue connection, context, and community with God and each other here in an environment of grace and love. So, feel free to journey around the space. Explore. We have many different topics for discussion. Outside the class, Sons of the Father, the Bible Project, Aleph Beta, Follow the Red String, and more. So lend your ear, then lend your voice. Join a conversation, start a conversation, ask questions. Because on this journey, you're probably around folks that just might be pondering the same thing. Community that can build and connect. So come in and join us. And welcome to The Dusty Feet. So, good evening. It's April 25th, 2023, and we are continuing our Matthew series, Tim Mackie, with episode 32, Signs of the Times. And this is part 1 of 3. This way of doing things, you can watch the video before we begin chatting. We hope to keep these to around 15 minutes or so. Easy to catch, even easier to catch up on. So, welcome to Outside the Class. In the description below are links to all of the audio, video, and source documents that we use here in the Dusty Feet. We want to make sure that any material we use here is properly credited to those folks who work so hard to bring it to us. Without their efforts, the learning we do here does not happen. And remember, on YouTube, don't forget to subscribe and click that bell icon if you want a reminder. And again, it is expected that you watch the reference videos first to get a context for this discussion and to hear the perspective of the originator. On TheDustyFeet.com, in the Outside the Class section, we have the entire Matthew series thus far. Each of the source videos for all of our discussions are posted there in advance. Of course, as always, links are also in the description below. So, if not yet, pause this, either go to TheDustyFeet.com or click on the link in the description below, and then we can come back, we can chat. And we're back. Okay, so again, I want to make it kind of clear as we begin that I'll be mentioning and discussing some points that'll be very challenging for some. And again, I suspect that it will divide the room at times. My intent is to share what I currently believe and understand about the kingdom of God concepts, both the narrow ones and the wide ones. Okay? So, look like to be a follower of Jesus in a crazy world, right? What are we to be and do in the midst of the craziness? Because remember that the world, since Jesus especially, has been bouncing around all over the place for 2,000 plus years. And I'm completely compelled that a follower of Jesus actually did not look much different than what a follower of God should have looked like back in the day. Does that make sense? That a follower of God and a follower of Jesus looked and acted like the same thing, or should have. What Jesus was calling them back to were the Father's ways. Remember that Jesus only pointed to the Father, only pointed to his will, and he only pointed to his ways. So a follower of Jesus would very much be a follower of God. Kind of makes sense, right? The instructions and principles haven't changed, only the times that everyone had lived throughout history. That said, so what's my intentional behavior post Jesus? It's an interesting question, especially in relation to what we just talked about with the God follower, right? So I have this upside down, right side up thought, and I don't want to make it sound too complicated or too psychological, but let's give it a stab. So we have a plea from Moses in Exodus to the children of Israel about God's ways, what was expected of the people that God chose to be his own, and then he asked them to follow him. He used Moses to talk to the people, very similar to what Jesus did to the folks in his time, right? Both took the time to commune with God and then share to the people. Both were declaring, in a sense, the kingdom of God. The Jews, it was a kingdom that was supposed to be a representation of God's ways to the nations. Those post Jesus, it's supposed to be a kingdom that's supposed to be a representation of God's ways to the nations. Yeah. Both are called light and salt. Both are called to be emissaries of God to the world that they affect, right? Children of Israel had a land that one time God had given to them with his protection. Still, that lasted for hundreds of years before God just removed his protection. After that, we have a crazy civil war that split the nation that God declared, right, into two. And eventually, both of those kingdoms were carried off into captivity. So Jesus comes on the scene and he declares a kingdom of God. But this one, due to the previous circumstances, is now going to be a borderless kingdom. Jesus knows that these lost sheep are those that need to understand the kingdom of God first. They need to understand that the land has been defiled by so many before, and that would eventually, it would see more destruction. That last revolt was the result. It really is ironic and it's a tragic event. And it's even one that even now I struggle with, okay? Because that the revolt was from the Jews that wanted Rome out of Jerusalem and the land, but God did not side with them and their thoughts at that time. No matter how well intentioned, Jerusalem was taken and the temple laid waste. The want of the people to take Jerusalem back was not in the will of God at that time. And that revolt, that actually led to the utter destruction of the temple. So God's going to have to sort that part out, right? For us, in that time, let's not forget that all of those, the time of Jesus, it includes again all the disciples, expect that Jesus, he would have overthrown Rome. Up until that horrendous night where he was taken captive, beaten, falsely accused, and the following morning executed, they were ready for Jesus to take down Rome. But that crowd that had but a week earlier hailed the king as he entered the city would call for his death because he had not lived up to their expectations. Even after his resurrection, they had renewed hope. Now he would take care of Rome. But that again, it didn't happen. So Tim gets to this passage in Matthew where we have a prophet like statement about the demise of the temple, that this place that God had called his own for some time, but now would be no longer. Now, I tend to lean towards the position that Tim takes. Actually, I have for quite some time, and that's that Jesus is referring to the destruction of the temple and not further down events. Is it possible to be? Maybe. That's it. I'm just not compelled, like Tim, that this was a statement, because this was a statement really for that generation. Yeah. Because Jesus had laid out some rather bold expectations, right? That this temple was now not the place that God would make his own, but that each person that was part of the body, right? That collection of God followers, that they would be a moving, living, breathing representation. Not about the overthrow of Rome. It never was. That part, as always, ever will be God's to handle. Now, here's an interesting upside down thought, one that compares in a few ways to the prophet like status of Moses and Jesus. And this is probably a stretch for a few, and they'll divide the room. But there are so many contextual connections between Moses and Jesus that I expect that there should be, right? Because, we'll be addressing a community. It's the same community. Go figure. In Exodus, Moses is chosen by God to guide his chosen people. He communes with God and passes what is told by God, right, to his people. That sets up the expectations for a kingdom and what that kingdom would look like. There's a 3-day event where God sets up the people to be ready to commit to the kingdom, right? Starts with the Big Ten. He declares that God has come to test you, right? Commitment always as a test. And after the fiasco of the spies in the land and the 40 years after, remember that generation delay? We get near the end of Deuteronomy, right? We're in chapter 30. This is what it says as a refresher. So it shall be when all of these things have come about you, the blessing and the curse which I've set before you, and you call them to mind in all the nations where the Lord your God has banished you, and you return to the Lord your God and obey him with all your heart and soul, according to all that I've commanded you today, to you and to your sons, then the Lord your God will restore you from captivity and have compassion on you, and will gather you again from all the peoples where the Lord your God has scattered you. If your outcasts are at the ends of the earth, from where the Lord your God will gather you, and from there will bring you back, the Lord your God will bring you into the land which your fathers possessed, and you shall possess it, and he will prosper you and multiply you more than your fathers. Moreover, the Lord your God will circumcise your heart and the heart of your descendants, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, that you may live. The Lord your God will inflict all of these curses upon your enemies and those who hate you and who have persecuted you. And you shall again obey the Lord and observe all his commandments, which I've commanded you today, because then the Lord will prosper you abundantly in all the work of your hand, in the offspring of your body, in the offspring of your cattle, in the produce of your ground. For the Lord will again rejoice over you for good, just as he rejoiced over your fathers, if you obey the Lord your God to keep his commandments and his statutes, which are written in this book of the law. If you turn to the Lord your God with all your heart and soul. For this commandment, which I've commanded you today, is not too difficult for you, nor is it out of reach. It's not in heaven that you should say, who will go up to heaven for us and get it for us and make us hear it that we may observe it, right? Nor is it beyond the sea where you should say, who will cross the sea for us to get it for us, to make us hear it that we may observe it. but the word is very near you. It's in your mouth. It's in your heart, that you may observe it. See, I set before you today life and prosperity, death and adversity. In that I command you today to love the Lord your God, to walk in his ways, to keep his commandments and his statutes and his judgments, that you may live and multiply, and that the Lord your God may bless you in the land where you are entering to possess it. But if your heart turns away and you will not obey, but are drawn away and worship other gods and serve them, I declare you today that you will perish. You will not prolong your days in the land where you're crossing the land of Jordan to enter and possess it. I call heaven and earth to witness against you today that I have set before you life and death, blessing and curse. Choose life in order that you may live, you and your descendants, by loving the Lord your God, by obeying his voice, by holding fast to him. For this is your life and the length of your days, that you may live in the land which the Lord swore to your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, to give to them. So, next time in part 2, we're going to talk about this impassioned plea we got in Deuteronomy 30, and as it sets us up to continue this prophet-like role and more about Jesus's part in the prophet and the comments that he makes. Okay. Our point to ponder. And our point to ponder comes from Tim, and I love this picture, and I want to share it. Very relatable to the graphic that he had, and that's the foothills that go back to the mountains. And just remember that that's a wonderful graphic representation of how Hebraic prophecy can play out. It was a good example. I really appreciated it. So there you go. We'll be seeing it again. And thanks for with us today and outside the class on the Dusty Feet.